G'day YouTube. Warbles on a lot here. It's a bit past midday, local daylight saving Eastern Standard Time, and I'm just about to open, well, it's actually the third beer. Because after having sort of worked up for the wedding on the weekend and all the rest of it, and been a bit worried about how much rain we haven't been having. In the last 24 hours, I've had 60 millimetres of rain, and therefore, thus and because, me boy walls is full, and I decided to have a bit of a day off. And while watching the YouTubes, I came across a video on the ABC News channel. And there we go. What do we got? The story behind Christian Porter's accuser bursting the Canberra bubble. Four corners. If you really want the background before listening to what I've got to say now, I strongly suggest that you go and watch that video. Okay, so either you've gone and paused my video and you've watched all that and you understand the background of everything that I have to warble on a lot about. Or you haven't, and let's just say that maybe 50% of people take the hint. The other 50% figure they can pick it up along the way. So here's a bit of a sort of Clip Notes version, or Cliff Notes version, as apparently there's a proprietary brand of Clip Notes, which styles itself Cliff for Foxtrot Notes. This is the Clip Notes version. Last year, before Christmas, ABC television, Four Corners, put up a show called Bursting the Canberra Bubble, and they were talking about the culture of misogyny. And they featured a particular story which had come to the attention of once upon a time Prime Minister, Liberal Prime Minister, and for my overseas viewers, Liberal, in inverted commas, air quotes, Liberal in Australia is the registered brand name of the Conservative Tory Party. It was started in 1947-48 by Menzies, Gordon Reginald Menzies, the bloke who was such an ardent monarchist that when Australia adopted decimal currency, he had advocated for the money to be called royals and crowns, not dollars and cents. Right? I mean, he was a Fruit Loop. He was out there. But as crazy a monarchist as he was, Menzies, he branded his Conservative Tory party with the Liberal logo, slogan. And really the only liberty that the Liberal Party in Australia or any of its states seeks to acquire, defend and protect is the liberty to exploit the working classes and trash the environment for the benefit of profit seeking. That's the kind of liberty that the Australian Liberal Party goes after. And as an example of the toxic culture within the Liberal Party, there were several people broadcast as witnesses to an incident where Australia's Attorney General, the Federal Attorney General, the top lawyer in the nation in the Morrison government. And Scott Morrison, if you're not aware, his nickname is Scotty from marketing. He's a tourism industry promoter from the suburbs of Sydney. he worships at the Pentecostal church, which is a charismatic evangelistic church, which, among other things, is kind of famous for its acceptance and embrace of the practice of foaming at the mouth and speaking in tongues. That would possibly not be germane to the current discussion were it not for the fact that once upon a time, back in the days when Trumpy were the prissy dunce of the excited status of Norte armed Americano, Scotty from marketing was going to the excited status of Norte armed Americano, and he wanted to do two things. One was to go to the opening of a cardboard box manufacturing facility operated by an Australian expatriate called Pratt. Now, Pratt is a English vernacular word for an idiot, but anyway, Pratt was opening a cardboard box factory in California. Scotty from marketing wanted to go there and accumulate kudos for an Australian is opening a factory in America, but he didn't think that it would matter that Trumpy was also showing up, and Pratt was a big Trump supporter, and this was pretty much the first campaign date operation instigation propaganda venue for Trumpy's re-election campaign. And there was the Australian Prime Minister turning up at Pratt's cardboard box factory, and he was broadcast across the world, and particularly in redneck America, as supporting Trumpy. But on that same trip, Morrison from marketing the Pentecostal, he wanted to take his personal suburban pastor from the Pentecostal church to the White House to have an official dinner with him, and he was bringing his spiritual advisor with him to the White House. He wanted to have dinner with Trumpy, right? And the White House said, well, excuse me, Morrison from marketing, but your personal Pentecostal pastor is the particular son of what used to be the head of the Pentecostal church in Australia, who came up extremely very unfavourably in the Royal Commission into institutional childhood sexual and physical abuse, because your pastor's father made a career out of protecting pedophiles in the Pentecostal church, and he's got such a vile reputation on the international stage when you Google him that no, you can't bring his kid with you to Trump's White House, because Morrison's spiritual advisor is too much of a fucking scumbag for Donald Trump's White House to stomach. Wrap your little heads around that one. So apparently, according to the ABC Four Corners report back in November, they already had lots and lots and lots of evidence that Christian Porter, which is the name of Australia's Federal Attorney General, who's currently on mental health leave, um, and I got to say now, the very first time I ever met anybody who was called Christian, I was 11 years old. I was a lapsed Presbyterian since I was 6, and I'd been shipped out to a Catholic boarding school. And I met this kid whose name was Christian, and he claimed to be the brother of a rock and roll star. And pretty much every second thing that came out of his mouth was total fucking bullshit. He was one of the most overcompensated inferiority complexes on legs that I've ever met. And one of the gut reaction level learnings that I picked up in the encounter, my bed was across the aisle from his bed in a dormitory where 60 or 70 little boys were being locked up by men who wore caftans. It was a De La Salle Brothers high school, boarding school. I figured out that nobody other than a Catholic has the arrogance and the hubris and the audacity to call their child Christian. And I speak as a Presbyterian who was baptized, not baptized, that's a Catholic word, I was christened Christopher. Now, has different effects on different people in different milieus and environments, and it wasn't really until about, I don't know, 1968 or 69, and we were on a bus tour on the snowy mountains in the warmest season they'd ever had when there was no snow in the winter. So we'd gone to look at the snow. And something came up about Hare Krishnas, which at the time were very new and innovative in Australia. And my mother said, well, look, it's pretty stupid. They sit there singing or stand there singing Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. And it just goes on and on and on and repeats endlessly. She said, how would you feel if somebody was standing on the side of the road singing Chrissy Wharton, Chrissy Wharton, Chrissy Wharton? Would you think they had some inside path to what God wanted everybody to do on earth? And yeah, absolutely, she's right. And I've noticed, how many Hare Krishnas have you ever met whose name is Harry? Hmm? Not fucking many. Well, anyway, apparently, if you're a Catholic, you get such a big dose of self entitlement and got mit uns syndrome that you can name your kid Christian. And they tend to act and behave literally as if got mit uns, because my name's Christian. Anything I do, Jesus is going to tick off on in heaven because I did it, therefore it's okay. That's my experience going to exclusive, high fee Catholic boarding schools. My experience of people called Christian. I meet somebody called Christian and I wonder just how fucking corrupt and vicious they are, because they've been convinced that God's on their side for their whole bloody life. Okay, that was up to then. In the meaning of the time, somebody called Brittany Higgins, I think her name was, she came forward with a public complaint that she got raped in the minister's office in Parliament House. She was raped on the couch after a senior Liberal Party staffer, she was a junior Liberal Party staffer. They were both paid by the Finance Committee, but their terms of employment were determined by the minister they were employed by. She was taken out on a night carousing the town, and when she was leglessly pissed, she was taken back to Parliament House by the senior Liberal Party staffer, and he used his slash their parliamentary pass to get them both in past the security guards into the minister's office, where she woke up being raped on the couch in the minister's office. So she went and reported to the Finance Committee, which was her titular employer because they pay her wages, and they went back to the minister with the complaint. And then she was summoned to the minister's office and given an interview beside the couch on which she'd been raped. And she says, 2 years down the track, that she was given to understand that her complaint was a political problem which had to be managed. And she didn't lose her job because she did not go to the police. She was given to understand that if she went to the police, she would have to stop working for the finance department or finance committee, whatever it is, and therefore she would lose her job as a staffer in the public service working for the Liberal Party in the government, because it's the public service that employs the staffers. It's the Liberal Party who tells them what to do. And kind of since the John Howard regime, it has become fashionable in Australia to, instead of allowing the civil servants to appoint the staffers on a merit-based system, the party in government selects the staffers on a party loyalty-based system and inserts them above the civil servants who've been trained how to do the job. Okay, so the Brittany Higgins lady, she gets told to pull her head in or lose your job. She may have got a pay rise, she may have got a promotion. I don't know what was done for her, but she was effectively prevented from going to the police. And time spooled on and time spooled on, and she felt worse and worse, and it all became intolerable. And she spoke up. And when she spoke up, some other woman said, oh dear, oh dear, oh dear, in 2020, Higgins got raped in 2019. She got raped in 2020. In 2020, the same bloke did the same thing to her, got her drunk and raped her. And if Higgins's complaint had been dealt with properly, then that bloke wouldn't have been in a position to rape the second woman. And apparently, the bloke who raped both of them, he was in a psych hospital hiding from the media. And the second woman said that, if he'd been dealt with properly, she wouldn't have been raped. And then somebody else came up and said, oh, yes, I was at a meeting with him and he groped me under the table and, run his hand up my leg and did all sorts of horrible molestery sort of rock spider things. And apparently, what happened to him was when the second woman said that she'd been raped by the senior Liberal Party staffer, that's when the senior Liberal Party staffer was terminated by the Finance Committee, but he was granted a lobbyist's pass, so he was able to still access the building and walk past two or three or however many of the women that he had worked his power trips upon in order to gain not quite sexual favours, but the ability to molest them. So that was kind of the backdrop when all of a sudden, kind of like a bombshell, somebody anonymously sent a 31-page formal complaint, which was unsigned because the complainant had committed suicide after being released from a psychiatric hospital due to this, which she'd been admitted to, due to the stress of COVID regulations preventing her from taking the completed formal complaint from Adelaide, or maybe it was from Melbourne, to Sydney, and to sign each page in front of the New South Wales Police, with whom she had already spoken on 3 previous occasions, and they knew it was coming and she was going to take it there, but COVID restrictions said she couldn't travel, and so she went into a depressive spiral. She'd been diagnosed with bipolar depression for years, went into hospital, came out of hospital, rang up the police in New South Wales, said, because of mental health problems and issues, I'm not going to proceed. And then the next day, she killed herself. But her 31-page complaint detailing how when she was 16 and she was pretty much the smartest kid in not only her high school, but all the high schools around, which is how come she came to be on the Australian debating team. 4 kids, 2 girls, 2 boys, who assembled in Sydney at the Sydney University and debated international teams. So she was an absolute, rising star, meteoric career expected. Everything was going well. And one of the other people on the team, her name was Kate. One of the other blokes on the team, his name was Christian. And that turns out to be Christian Porter, who today is the Attorney General who's on mental health leave because the dead woman's friends have forwarded her unsigned formal complaint to the New South Wales Police to the Prime Minister, Scotty from marketing, who hasn't really done anything and likes to brush shit under the carpet because that's the Pentecostal way, prevarication. Also to Senator Jenny Scott Haynes, the Green Party senator, leading senator, and to Senator Penny Wong, who's the Labor Party leading senator. And it's all sort of worked its way through the mass media until apparently, as of last week, everybody in the media and everybody in the legal community knew who it was that was accused of raping a 16-year-old back when he was 17, 33 years ago. And Scott Morrison said, well, basically, he's guided by the New South Wales Police, who say that because the complainant is now deceased, therefore the allegations are untestable in any court of law, thus and because the complaint died with her. And I just watched that Four Corners thing on the phone. And I heard Malcolm Turnbull's story, and he also had received a communication from the woman back when she was alive, addressed to him and his wife, and he had sent her back an email saying, yes, you're doing the right thing by going to the New South Wales Police. Penny Wong had told her to go to the New South Wales police, and she had suggested she go to the Rape Crisis Counselling Centre, and then she had, via a third person who knew both of them, she had confirmed that yes, she is getting help from the Rape Crisis Centre. Scott Morrison stood up and said that he's the Prime Minister and the police say that there's no possibility of a conviction, so therefore there's no prosecution. So thus and because the complaint has died with the alleged complainant and there's nothing to investigate and it's all got to be put to bed, as if nothing has happened. And because it's a rape case, he expects that to hold water in the minds of the public. And I've got to say, every murder case that ever happened, the victim is dead and can't testify. The fact that the complainant can't testify in a murder trial doesn't mean that the murder trial can't go ahead. And it doesn't mean that the murder trial can't establish beyond reasonable doubt whether the murderer committed the murder. So why is it that beyond reasonable doubt in a rape trial requires the physical presence of the rape victim in the courtroom to testify what they have said, whether it's male or female? There have been any number of parliamentary independent inquiries set up into everything up to and including previous Prime Minister Julia Gillard's kitchen sink renovations and whether that was done legally or illegally with party funding. And that inquiry was set up by the current Liberal Party government. Admittedly, it was done when Abbott was running it, not while Turnbull was running it, not while Morrison was running it, but it's the same government. They found no problem digging into 30-year-old what happened here stories about Julia Gillard. And here's the big thing. Last week, I think it was Monday, Malcolm Turnbull was interviewed and broadcast on ABC Radio National. And what he said was, here's this woman who was a university qualified published academic. I thought she was a lawyer, but she was actually a historian, good at documenting shit. And she'd written this 31-page formal complaint to the police, and the only thing she hadn't done was sign it in front of the police. She told all her friends and two of the other people who were on the debating team, the other man and the other woman, they are extensively videoed talking of their knowledge of Kate and what happened on the night with Kate in the Four Corners interview. So the only person who has not been questioned extensively about the night is Christian Porter, the man who has a 30-year history in politics of being a bit of a sleazebag and who has been accused of raping someone 33 years ago. He was apparently such a self-entitled little arrogant, hubristic schoolboy that when he was 17, according to Kate, what she said to her friends and what she wrote down and stuff, he said to her that he expected to be Prime Minister by the time he was 50 because his father was a parliamentarian, successful parliamentarian. Like, he's one of these blue-blooded, arrogant little Liberal Party pricks who figure that they are born to the reins of power. So whatever they want is okay. And his name's Christian, so God's on side with it. Is he likely to back off when he goes to a function with a 16-year-old member of his own debating team and she gets legless drunk and he offers to walk her back to her quarters, and she, as she said in her statement, she had no reason to suspect that anything was wrong with the idea. She invited him into her room and then, as she stated, quote, what happened then was a surprise, a complete surprise. And on Four Corners, what it says that she said happened was he forced her to perform oral sex. And then he raped her twice. And what all of the other people who knew her said that She was the brightest, smartest, most up and coming, fastest rising star in our whole school experience. And then she went to Sydney for the debate, and she came home and she was a shattered, tattered, battered, hopeless, failing, twisted wreck of a person who was in and out of psych hospitals and got diagnosed with manic depression, aka bipolar disorder. Our Prime Minister, Scotty from marketing from the Pentecostal push it under the carpet brigade, he could have ordered an independent inquiry into this sort of shit months ago, and he didn't. He wanted to brush it all under the carpet. The minister whose office the rape happened in, she's on record as having stated to her entire staff, the lying cow, when Brittany Higgins went public with how she got raped and then told that if she went to the police, she would lose her job. The minister now says, also on medical leave, because, oh, I've got a palpitation of the fart. I might die if I'm under stress. That's why I'm the Assistant Minister for Defence. Can't cope with stress, Minister for Defence, palpitation of the fart. Got to go on fucking medical leave because somebody might ask her at a press conference or at a press club gallery dinner that she failed to show for, might ask her questions of why she said that these junior staffer who said she was raped by a senior staffer was a lying cow. Oh, well, I was only calling her a lying cow when she said I didn't support her enough. I wasn't calling her a lying cow when she said that she was raped. Oh, no, no, no. Calling someone a lying cow doesn't besmirch their entire reputation for telling the truth across the board. Yeah, not when you're a minister. You can compartmentalise the insults, like very wafer thin. It's a wafer thin insult. I only I only insult this bit of her, not all of that. Yeah, bullshit. Bull fucking shit. That's why Morrison from marketing and the Pentecostal push it under the carpet brigade. He's now got two ministers on medical leave. One of them because I get palpitations of the fart if you ask me a difficult question. And the other one because he's going off to see the brain mechanic to figure out why it is that he keeps dropping Freudian slips in his fucking press conferences. I just watched the whole thing, the Four Corners. I didn't watch his entire press conference. But the bit that stuck in my what passes for mind, at 21 minutes 10, Christian Porter is asked by one of the reporters, did you have sex with anyone on the debating team? And Christian Porter replies, just no. But the problem is that the word just is actually a contraction of the word justifiably. So what Christian Porter actually said, 21 minutes and 10 seconds into the Four Corners report, when asked the question, did you have sex with anyone on the debating team? He said justifiably no. What that means is he had no justification to have sex with anyone on the debating team. He has not answered the question, did you have sex with anyone on the debating team? It is a subconsciously deliberate evasion. I don't know whether he is consciously aware of what's gone on. My guess is he's doing his level fucking best to suppress and repress all memories of that night. But the fact is that there were only two teenage males on the debating team, and only one of them was named Christian, and he's it. The fact is that no 47-year-old woman or 49-year-old woman has any reason to pretend to have been raped 33 years ago and decide that she's finally had a gutful and she's going to go to the police. She was known, she was famous for her infallible memory and her ready recall of the facts. Even after this, she never became the first woman Prime Minister of Australia, which was what all her teachers expected her to be. She still became a university qualified practicing historian. In terms of what she said to her friends, their testimony, it might be hearsay in a criminal court of law, but to a committee of inquiry or an investigating commission, there's a pretty good lineup between what's in her statement and what her friends at the time recall about her and what her friends, when she was actively attempting to move a complaint forward, what they say. It all kind of lines up. What doesn't line up is it justifiably never happened. Just imagine. Please imagine that it just never happened. That was Porter's defence. And Christian Porter and Morrison from marketing both stated publicly that they had not read the 31-page statement to the police, which only had to be signed in order to initiate the whole police thing. And here's the really big bit that sticks in my mind is a week ago I heard Malcolm Turnbull, ex-Prime Minister of Australia, saying, here you have this woman, a qualified academic, highly respected within her field, highly respected by all of her colleagues and companions back to school days. She's been struggling with this all of her life. It's been causing her mental health problems. It's handicapped her career. She's just on the point of getting something done about it. She had every reason to be feeling hopeful. All she had to do was wait until the COVID restrictions were lifted. And, like they have been lifted, she didn't have to wait long. And then suddenly, apropos of more or less nothing, she rings up the police and cancels the whole process, and then she kills herself. And as Turnbull said, no evidence has been tendered or offered or broadcast of how she killed herself, or did she kill herself, or why she killed herself. There's been nothing like that. And he said, I have no reason to believe that she did kill herself. And if she did, he has no evidence to believe that nobody spoke to her and convinced her to kill herself. So here we are in Australia in 2021, and the most embarrassing possible allegation that could be put to the Morrison government, this side of Morrison fucking both his daughters in the main street of fucking Williamtown or something, has been in the wings for months. We have a bloke called Peter Dutton who runs the Australian Department of Homeland Insecurity. He also runs ASIO. ASIO are the people who spy on Australians inside our borders. He admits that he knew about it 3 weeks before the Prime Minister knew about it. ASIO is, and has been ever since the current Liberal government has been in charge of Australia, ASIO has been more or less employed to conduct surveillance and espionage against anybody who might do or say anything that embarrasses the government in Canberra, the Liberal Conservative government in Canberra. I ask you, I don't suggest anything, but I ask you, because once upon a time I sat through law lectures when I was being trained as a registered general nurse, and I got a distinction in the fucking final exam. And they taught us that it's not possible to ask a defamatory question. So I ask you, why should I not wonder, ponder, suspect, deliberate the possibility that one of the fucking black spy versus white spies, spooks versus spooks brigade from ASIO may have approached Kate, the historian, pushing the New South Wales police into prosecuting the Australian Federal Attorney General. Why should I not wonder, ponder, contemplate the possibility of ASIO having spoken to her and told her, if you go ahead with this, you're dead? Why shouldn't I think about that? They wouldn't need to fucking do anything. She's already really hyper super fragile. I mean, she's lasted 33 years after having been raped at age 16, if we are to believe her testimony, and I, for one, do believe her testimony. And here's the point, here's the big point, right? There's a fucking industry in this country and in lots of countries all over the world devoted to maintaining the employment of clinical psychologists and psychiatrists trying to talk people out of committing suicide. And the politicians meagerly and miserly fund the psychologists and the psychiatrists, and they publicly bewail and bemoan the fact that we've got a youth suicide problem. None of them wants to talk about the fact that actually, I want to be honest, 60% of all suicides in society are single men over 75. That's who does the most killing of themselves. However, underneath that, you've got this other whole segment of society, and they are the, quote, survivors of child sexual assault. Now, I've quoted this in several videos, so my regular viewers and subscribers can perhaps be forgiven for going, oh, fuck, man, he's doing it again. I've heard it before. Here's the deal. In 2010, on February the 14th, which is my father's birthday, haha, you thought I was going to say Valentine's Day, but it is Valentine's Day, and it's wildly ironic as well as appropriate and or inappropriate, depending on your point of view. But on that day, ABC Radio National FM network, which is kind of like the self-appointed pseudo-intellectual I want to know shit radio station for Australia, on their 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock news, right? So 9 bulletins in a row. They covered for a 1 minute description the item that the Melbourne University School of Medicine had been conducting a long-term life outcomes research program into the survivors of child sexual assault. They'd started in 1965 and they'd collected new cases, 2,000 of them, till 1985, and then they'd observed them all the way up until 2005. And then they'd spent 5 years crunching the numbers. And in the first edition of the 2010 Australian Medical Association Journal, their peer-reviewed research results had been published. And what they found was that survivors of childhood sexual assault, and in Australia, you're not an adult till you're 18, and according to the neurophysiologist and neuropsychologist, your brain doesn't finish growing until you're 25. So it's arguable whether you're a child until you're 18, or whether you're a child until you're 21, or whether you're a child until you're 25, depending on whether you go on current when you're allowed to drink, current medical evidence, or in the middle, you've got traditional, you get the key to the front door when you're 21. So anyway, survivors of childhood sexual assault, 2,000 of them, measured over 20 to 40 years, they exhibit, was the word in the report, they exhibit, or demonstrate, 18 times, not 180%, 1,800%, 1,800%, 18 times the background society's annual death rate from suicide. They also demonstrate 48 times the background society's death rate from accidental drug overdose, and all of their deaths cluster 18 years after the abusive event. So if we have a very highly intelligent 16-year-old who is raped and she lasts 33 years, she has survived twice as long as the average 16-year-old who gets raped. That's what the medical evidence is. And when I heard that on the radio, I got so worked up about it, I wrote to the New South Wales State Attorney General and I detailed, through mechanical typewriter on paper, and I sent it through snail mail. And that means they had to bloody well answer it. And the New South Wales Attorney General wrote back to me straight away and said, "Thank you very much. It's all very interesting," because I had suggested that as a result of Melbourne University's School of Medicine report published in the AMA Journal, an automatic attempted murder charge should be appended to every child sexual assault charge, because all you'd have to do was conduct a public education awareness campaign so that the entire population was aware that this is the effect of anybody sexually assaulting a child. Right? They will then later go on to demonstrate 18 times the death rate from suicide and 48 times the death rate from accidental drug overdose, because they have been functionally shattered and they're going to be unable to cope and they're going to be seeking pain relief or taking themselves off the playing board because they can't cope with it. And the New South Wales Attorney General wrote back to him and he saying, "Well, thanks very much, and it's all very interesting, but in order to convict somebody of a murder charge, you would have to prove that they intended to kill the person, and we don't see that as being viable, and it would just be a waste of the court's time and money and energy to try and process it. So just leave it with us." And behold, about, I think it was 6 months later, they wrote back to me and they said, "We thought you might be interested to know that we have succeeded in raising the minimum penalty for raping a child under 12 to 25 years, which is equal to the maximum penalty for murder." In Australia, you can get up to 25 years for murder, or you can get life with no parole. But life in Australia means 25 years. So basically, yeah, you get, in New South Wales, if you rape someone under 12, you get life in jail, 25 years. That's your minimum sentence. If it's really an aggravated case, you will spend more time in jail after that. So when I watched that ABC TV thing on Four Corners, there is absolutely nothing in there that makes me think that Christian Porter did anything other than what the woman who used to be a 16-year-old girl says that he did. It was 1988 and it was Western Australia. Now, I grew up in what they call a social black hole. The first person who used the term used it back in the days when Nelson Mandela was still in jail. And the examples of a social black hole that he gave were New South Wales inland regional towns and the whole of white South Africa. And it's a place where time moves more slowly and new ideas take longer to filter in. Now, here I sit 20 miles away at Emmaville. They didn't get electricity till 1958. You can still go there, and in the general store, you can buy hurricane lamps and you can buy mantles for your gas lights. Effectively, inland New South Wales here is about 10 years behind Sydney, and Sydney's 10 or 20 years behind the United States. And the middle of the United States is behind the coast of the United States. The social black holes exist all over the place. One of the event horizons that you can notice is if you're driving up the highway, nobody bothers waving to anybody. If you go far enough off the highway on the Emmaville Road that you get past the Glen Innes Airport, every car waves to every car. Or at least they did in 1984 when I moved to Emmaville. It was the first thing I noticed. And I asked somebody at the hospital while we were sitting there in the nurse's office, how come everybody waves to me when I'm on this side and not on that side? And the answer is when you're on the Glen Innes side of the airport, You might be, well, you probably are, if you're crossing an unfamiliar car, it's just someone from town. If you're on the Emerville side of the airport, it might be one of your neighbours who's just bought a different car, and you don't want to be accused of snubbing anyone, so you just wave to every car. So the event horizon doesn't actually follow the boundary of the highway. It's about 5 miles either side. Up the highway, you're living in modern city-bred Australia. 5 miles either side of the highway, up here on top of the mountains, and you're out in the social black hole where time moves more slowly and old-fashioned ideas still pertain. I'm going to suggest to you that to the students of a high-fee private Catholic boarding school, that's a kind of a social black hole. It's a kind of social black hole where the athletic young men, particularly the ones who are on the teams representing their school or their state or anything like that, they feel like up and coming young gods. I mean, I've gone to school with these blokes. I know what they're like. What Christian Porter is reputed to have done, it's a lot worse than your average date rape kind of thing. You know, like my understanding of date rape is when two young people go out, get drunk, they get more excited than they expect to get, and after they've had sexual intercourse, then she says, "Oh shit, I didn't really want to do that." But it's not such a big deal breaker that they never see each other again. It was back in the 1970s more or less de rigueur to regard no as meaning not yet. Right? I'm the 1961 vintage, and it's not with any degree of pride, it's with a huge degree of shame that I make that statement. When I was a teenager, no meant not yet. It didn't mean that anybody was entitled to use force or to manhandle the sweet young thing. What it meant from my point of view back when I was a teenager at a Catholic boarding school, and I was a Presbyterian, but my theory was that we knew enough from reading magazines that there was such a thing as arousal curves, which were kind of different with men and women. We'd heard about erogenous zones. Those of us who were into anatomy had a fair degree about how things worked. And it was a case of where the onus was on us to stay on the correct side of the arousal curve such that the sweet young thing concerned was inviting us to proceed further. That's pretty much how it worked, you know. There was occasionally the invocation of double negatives where, you know, do you, if you thought you were going to get told no, instead of saying may I do thus and such, you might say, do you mind if I thus and such? And the theory at the time was that young girls are trained by their mothers to say no to any question a young boy puts to them in a clinch. So they say no, which means they don't mind, and then you can move on to do it. And then if they like it, if they enjoy it, it's okay to keep going. That was how we thought in 1978. In New South Wales, 100 miles from the east coast, do I think that the same ideas were percolating through the elitists at Catholic boarding schools in the Western Australia? Do I think it beyond the bounds of possibility that Christian Porter, when he was 17, would behave in the manner described? I don't think it's at all beyond the bounds of possibility. Do I think that he's probably doing everything he can to blank out and suppress the memory, having started law late when he was 24? By the time he was learning what the law actually says, he'd been doing all that shit for nearly 10 years. And apparently when he gets drunk in Canberra several years ago, he behaves just like he did when he was a teenager. Do I think that he's going to come back as Attorney General? No, I don't. Do I think it's going to pull down the Morrison government? I don't know. Maybe. It's not looking good for the Morrison government when they go to the next election. Global warming's going gangbusters. COVID's still happening. It's evolving, new mutations and variations faster than we can vaccinate people. The best vaccines have got to be kept at minus 70 degrees Celsius, thawed out for 12 hours, then used within 6 hours. Then you've got to come back 3 weeks later and have a second dose. And then 3 weeks after that, you're going to get immunity. But during the 6 weeks while you're waiting for your second dose, you can be infected with the virus. Your virus fights with your vaccine and you still shed live virus. So you're still infective. So everybody who's saying, oh, well, we've got to get rid of the masks and we've got to get rid of the travel restrictions because busyness as usual, and the Chamber of Commerce says we want certainty, the more purchase they get on the Morrison government, the more the new variants of COVID are just going to spread through the community every time they get out past the quarantines. There's several women who say they've been raped and groped and manhandled and molested by the Liberal Party or the Liberal Party staffers. There's a dead woman who says that she was raped by the federal Attorney General. Do I think that Morrison is going to survive all this shit? I don't know. How gullible, how stupid, how Sky News foxified are the suburban sheeples in Australia? Are they prepared to sit still for this? Are there enough blokes who've got their wives and girlfriends bamboozled into thinking that it's okay to do this and it's terrible to ask questions about what somebody did 33 years later? I would suggest to you that the case of Christian Porter pretty much epitomises the infinitely fractal karmic feedback loops that operate within the cosmic scoreboard effect. Christian Porter was raised to think as he did as a teenager. When he was a teenager, behaving as he's reputed to do, if that's what he did, and I think he probably did do that, when he was behaving that way, he couldn't see anything wrong with it. He didn't think there was anything wrong with it. He was on the greasy sled ride to being Prime Minister at age 50. All he had to do was just pick up everything that he wanted as it fell at his footsteps. And the smartest sweet young thing on the debating team was something that he pushed onto her knees so that she could fall at his feet. And he made her suck his dick, so she says. And while she was drunk and stupefied and shocked and horrified, then he raped her twice. And she says that they met up years later in the early 1990s and they had a couple of hours worth of eating dinner together, where he boasted that his current girlfriend tied a bit of plastic on his wrist so he'd remind himself not to kiss other girls. I have no reason to disbelieve the sweet young thing. I have every reason to suspect that Christian Porter is telling lies to himself in the hope that everybody else in the country believes him, because he doesn't want to consider at law what a fucking scumbag he was as a teenager. I've got to say, I was maybe half that bad of a scumbag, and that was 2 years later. Like, I can remember being a cad and a bounder when I was about 19. If the relationship hadn't have gone on for 3 weeks, you might have been able to say that, yeah, I date raped a girl. But we continued to have a relationship after that. And I didn't think that I date raped her. It's only in retrospect, looking back, that I walk around kicking myself up the arse and think, well, like, if anybody did that to my daughter, I would be very dirty on that bloke. But as bad as what I think about myself for what went on when I was 19 and I didn't know any better, and I got to admit it was because of that I sort of changed my ways, and then later on changed them again, and later on changed them again. And like, I've been voluntarily celibate for 22 years because I don't think I deserve a happy relationship with anybody, and if I try to have a happy relationship with anybody, I'll wind up having an unhappy relationship with somebody that I'm sort of purposely designed to mix badly with in the long term. And I figure that's my karmic feedback within the cosmic scoreboard effect. I could have had a happy relationship. I could have used my sexuality responsibly. I didn't do it. Therefore, I don't deserve to reap any of the rewards that are available to people who are responsible in the long term. I think Christian Porter has got away with it for a really, really, really long time. And his absolute last warning was back in about November when Four Corners put up that show about bursting the Canberra bubble. And they aired all that footage of people talking about how horrified they'd been to see him drunkenly groping young staffers in the corner of bars. And he denied all of it. He was carpeted by Turnbull, who was the Prime Minister at the time that it was supposed to have happened. He assured Turnbull that that didn't happen, and in his defence of himself, he stated to Four Corners back in November last year that, oh, well, Malcolm Turnbull called me into the office and he asked me about it, and I told him that none of it was true, and he then appointed me the Attorney General, so therefore I must have been right. So he has consistently pushed the same line of bullshit his whole fucking life. He's never had the humility to look at himself in the mirror and say, mate, you're a fucking asshole. What you did then is absolutely despicable, and you got no excuse other than to say that you didn't know any better, which admits that, you chose to believe whatever you wanted to believe in the heat of the moment, and then you've been denying it ever since. So do I think he's going to come back? No. Do I think he's ever going to get back into public life? Probably not. Would it surprise me if he comes back to a press conference and takes his own head off with a fucking revolver in front of the cameras like an American senator did 30 years ago when he was busted for sexual shenanigans in office? That would not surprise me at all. He's the kind of headstrong, highly strung, type A personality, overcompensated inferiority complex, perfectionist control freak who's got to be in charge of absolutely fucking everything. Otherwise he wouldn't be on this path. Is he going to be able to cope with having been shot down in flames by the memoirs of a dead woman that he raped 33 years ago? Oops, sorry, that he's alleged to have raped 33 years ago, and it's a very, very, very believable story. Is he going to be able to hide behind the fig leaf that her complaint died with her? And what did ASIO know, and when did they know it? And what does Peter Dutton have to say about that? And is it dangerous for me as a kangaroo feeder to sit here on the endangered species sanctuary and ask such questions? I don't fucking know. I don't know. But I don't expect the Morrison government will survive. I don't really expect Gladys Berejiklian's government to run for too much longer either. Several of her ministers have been busted for corruption. Her own personal boyfriend has been busted for corruption. It's been proved that she stayed being his girlfriend after he was busted for corruption. She's just done a deal with the National Party regarding koalas. Now, here's the thing. After the catastrophic bushfires, when 3 billion animals died, Australia's koala population was reduced by 90%. It's 9 decimations. It's not decimated, it was nearly annihilated. All the scientists got together and they said, what's got to happen unless we're going to lose the koalas by 2050? They're going to all be extinct. Is any land that's got koalas on it has to be managed for the benefit of the koalas. That's got to be the first priority. And if it's got koalas onto it, you're not going to be allowed, or you should not be allowed, to subdivide it, right? So what's happened is all of the failing farmers who are being put out of business by global warming who have mortgages rising up past the snorkel level, they have said to the New South Wales National Party, oh, boo-hoo, sob, sob. Fuck me with a barbed wire dildo. You can't let them do that to us. How else are we going to sell our fucking paddock beside the road, covered in trees? We want to sell that to the white shoe syndrome real estate developers in town so they can fucking cut it up into 5 acre blocks and sell it to ice cream lickers who have flogged their fucking McMansion in the suburbs to the Chinaman, and they want to go and get an easier lifestyle. If we've got to manage that country for the benefit of the koalas, we can't subdivide it and sell it to the ice cream lickers, and therefore the farmers won't be able to cash out on having fucked the land during their tenure before they piss off to the Gold Coast and lie around on the beach looking for prostate cancer to kill them so their wife can marry some other fucking idiot. So the National Party has once threatened to walk out of Parliament and sit on the crossbenches, and they all kissed and made up and waited for Christmas to go away. And now they're coming up with some scheme whereby only on the eastern seaboard, where there's a lot of people, does the land have to be managed for koalas. But anywhere else in Australia where there might be a few koalas on the property, and nobody fucking knows because nobody cares, because they're managing it for sheep, they're managing it for beef, they're managing it for wool, they're managing it for cotton, they're managing it for canola, they're managing it for corn. They're not managing it for koalas, and they don't fucking want to, and they don't want to spend any money on it. So they don't have to comply with any of these new fucking greeny regulations to make the koalas have a chance of surviving. The Liberal Party has already conceded defeat in the Western Australian election that has not yet occurred. So Western Australian Liberals are going down. Victoria, it's a Labor government. Queensland, it's a Labor government. New South Wales, the Liberals are going to go down. Federally, the Liberal Party is the party of male chauvinist pigs and rapists who expect to get away with it by hiding behind parts of the law that say, well, you're innocent until proven guilty, and if the claims against you can't be tested in person in court, then those claims don't exist. But we can go looking for who paid for Julia Gillard's kitchen cabinet 30 years ago. And whether the Australian population is manipulable and gullible sufficiently to the point where they're going to swallow Scotty from marketing's manipulations, I don't know. I really don't know. I'm pretty sure I raised my son never to fucking rape anybody or even push it. Don't ever push the point. If they say they're not interested, then, back off, go away. Wait until she's absolutely fucking hanging out and tearing your clothes off and it's totally, completely clear that she wants it to happen. If that's not the case, then do not delude yourself with whatever fantasies you may have been holding within your own mind. And that's the big thing. I was trying to explain it to a young fella recently. It's a bad idea to fantasize about having sex with the people that you meet in every daily life unless you're actually planning on settling down and having kids with them. Because otherwise, if you've spent hours and hours and hours fantasizing, it might be really easy to misconstrue a meaningless gesture as being a green light that's not there. And once you go down that misconstruing gestures that don't mean anything like you want them to mean, you can finish up in a very, very bad and wicked and evil place. And maybe when he was 17, if it happened the way she says it happened, maybe Christian Porter thought it was great. Maybe he's one of these blokes who think they're God's gift to women, that, like all they have to do is expose their penis to the woman and she'll become a convert for life and her whole existence will be made better by the interaction. There are men who think like that. I heard a background briefing program about a guru in Melbourne who was running an ashram, and he had a whole bunch of women and he was shagging all of them and telling them all to keep quiet and keep it all a secret. It's not as if it's a rare thing. It's a thing that happens And it shouldn't happen. And really, the only way that I know of to stop it from happening is to adopt the Swedish method of education into human reproduction. And that involves taking kindergarten children and giving them 1 hour of formal lessons per week on human reproduction. So when they pop out the end of the pipeline at the end of high school, they've had 500 hours. And they don't only know about sperms and eggs and penises and vaginas and plumbing and menstrual cycles. They also know about relationship theory and relationship therapy and financial theory and counselling and infant cooking and maternal nutrition and urology and gynecology and pretty much everything that's involved in having a baby and raising it to become a functional, responsible adult. And what they discovered when Edinburgh University was compared to Stockholm University, and they both compared their class of 1965, and they were doing this like 40 years later. Um, they discovered that it was 30 years later, they discovered that the children who'd had 500 hours of formal lectures into human reproduction and how it all works and what's supposed to happen and what you can do to make a mess of it, those children had a lower rate of being sexually abused as children because they wouldn't stand still for it. None of the invocations to secrecy worked. They had a higher age at their first sexual encounter. They had a lower number of partners before their first sexual partners before their first long-term relationship. They had a lower rate of relationship breakdown after they got into a long-term sexual relationship. They had a lower rate of unwanted or unplanned pregnancy. They had a lower rate of abortion. They had a lower rate of giving babies up for adoption. They had a lower rate of being arrested for petty crime. They had a lower rate of being charged and prosecuted and convicted in the courts. They had a lower rate of going to jail. They had a lower rate of being diagnosed with a mental illness, being admitted to a mental health facility, or being treated for mental illness. They had a lower rate of being unemployed. They had a lower rate of cancer. They had a lower rate of heart disease, and they had a lower rate of being declared bankrupt. And the conclusion, which was printed in 1997 in New Scientist, or the conclusion was reported, printed in New Scientist magazine in 1997 by Stockholm and Edinburgh University, was that if you really want your children to have a completely unsuccessful, pathetically hopeless and miserable life, then keep them all ignorant of everything to do with human reproduction and let them find out as they get raped behind a shelter shed in high school, or in Kate's case, in a dormitory facility on Sydney University when she was a member of the Australian International School debating team. And the only the only boy on the whole debating team whose name was Christian, who she says raped her, was Christian Porter. So who do I blame? I blame Christian Porter's parents. I blame his teachers. I blame his companions at school. I blame the culture and the milieu which grew such a person and then sent him halfway across the world, across the continent, well, sent him all the way across the continent to rape a teenager from Adelaide. Because why should I believe that anything else happened? Okay, you notice I didn't say that that's what happened. I ask a question. Why should I not believe that some other thing happened? What evidence or indication has Christian Porter put up to counteract the story of the woman who killed herself with despair when she couldn't get to New South Wales to sign her statement? Who knows? Maybe she was going to kill herself anyway. Maybe this was the last fucking gasp that she could think of. Go over there, sign the bloody complaint, and then kill yourself and let the bastards do what they can with that. Because if she'd signed the complaint, the police would have had to go forward with it. If she'd been murdered on the spot, the police would have had to go forward with it. Her testimony would not have fucking mattered. Innocent until proven guilty. And the point is, if you fool the court, if you succeed in success fully, not cesses, it's shit. If you successfully deceive the court and get away with something, statistically you are odds on to decide that you can get away with whatever you want, that you can't be caught, and you'll go forward to do it again, and next time familiarity will have bred contempt, and you will not be as careful the next time, and you will get caught. So I'm going to suspect that it's probably not the first person that's been raped under such circumstances. I don't know. Why would Christian Porter think that he could get away with it in 1988 at 17 if he hadn't already done it? Why would he think that? You've all heard about football tours. Football, meat pies, kangaroos and Holden cars. Australia, Australia, land of the great Merino. Australia, Australia, land of the jumbo jet. Australia, Australia, what we want we get. They're drinking songs that I picked up when I was a non-football team member going to Chevalier College, Bowral, 80 miles south of Sydney, high-priced Catholic boarding school, as a Presbyterian. When those guys came back from touring New Zealand, they came back amid a storm of police complaints for getting drunk and kicking down mailboxes. Apparently, one of the things that Christian Porter said about somebody else's comment 25 years ago when he was a university student, he described their argument something like as full of holes as a groupie's hymen. I forget what the actual quote was, but it, maybe as full of holes as a prostitute's hymen. The metaphor was that somebody's argument had more holes than Swiss cheese, more holes than the hymen of somebody who'd been highly sexually active. He made excuses during his 20-minute interview, his press conference, for all of the misogynistic things that he said 25 years ago when he was but a young man. And of course, now he's fully grown and he's the Attorney General. He doesn't think anything like that at all. And I'm thinking, well, it's like this, Christian Porter. For the first 3.5 years, a little baby, 25 to 35 times every hour, looks towards their regular loving carer and they make a noise or they whimper and they expect their regular loving carer to look at them and make eye contact and reassure them, yes, it's okay, you're a good little baby. And whatever you show a kid in their early days, weeks, months, years, that is what gets engraved by the data recording circuits of their brain. One example which occurs to me: when my son was 3 weeks old, I poked cotton wool in his ear holes. I pulled a beanie over his head to hold it in place. I strapped him into a baby capsule and I propped it up against the back wheel of my vehicle so he could watch while I cut firewood on the other side of the clearing. Didn't hurt his ears. He could see what was going on. He knew where Daddy was. When he was 13, he had paid for his second chainsaw with firewood sales, and the second one was brand new. When he was 18 months old, I once upon a time said to him, after he'd had his first flight in a 650 horsepower crop duster, and he was wrapped with aeroplanes. You're 1.5 years old, just gone for your first flight. Oh, aeroplanes, aeroplanes. He walked up to my aeroplane, which was a single-seat ultralight motor glider, and he was just barely tall enough to reach the bottom tip of the propeller blade. And he started waving it backwards and forwards. And I thought, oh, shit. I've seen a dog go through an aeroplane propeller. I don't want to see my kid go through it. So I went and I squatted in front of him and I said to my 1.5-year-old, I said, don't ever touch an aeroplane propeller. You don't know if the magneto is switched on. If it is, that's a hot prop. And if you move it just a little bit, the engine might start, and if it does, it'll suck you in and cut your head off. Yes, Daddy, yes, Daddy, yes, Daddy, said the 1.5-year-old. And time went on, and for the next year and a half, he was like 2 meters away from the bottom blade of every aeroplane propeller he ever saw, and he saw a lot of them because we hung around ultralight airfields. And then there came a day when he went flying twice in one day, and his two half brothers went flying as well in the same crop duster. And at the end of the day, his two half brothers were playing with two kids from the village who, before we rocked up, they had been standing on the outside of the fence bordering the runway. And every time the crop duster took off and the pilot pushed the throttle forward and 600 horsepower worth of wind hit the fence, they were getting blown over on their ass and rolled up the paddock. And they thought that was really fucking exciting. And then I show up with my 4 kids, and my daughter didn't want to go flying. My son said, yeah, he'd quite happily go flying, and he didn't want to sit on my lap because I had to stay and look after his little sister. My two stepsons, they went flying. So the two village kids had been completely sort of eclipsed. Their whole most exciting day had turned into shit because they didn't get to go flying and my kids did. They were playing Tracy's with my two stepsons. I was grinding the drum pump. My son, 3 years old, he's holding the nozzle in the fuel tank opening. The pilot of the crop duster is lying on his back on the ground and he's greasing the tail wheel. And one of the village kids, not my kids, like my kids know better than this shit, ran straight towards the aeroplane's bottom propeller blade, two-bladed propeller, grabbed it like it was a lamppost, swung around it, changed direction 90 degrees and run off in the other direction during a game of chasings. My stepson sort of backed off, and my son, who was 3, yelled to the 10-year-old, don't do that. Don't ever touch an aeroplane propeller. If the magneto's switched on, you don't know. It's a hot prop. And if it is, the engine will start and it'll suck you in and cut your head off. And then there was this clang as the pilot sat up and actually drew blood from his own forehead against the bottom of the tailplane because he couldn't believe a 3-year-old had said such a complex technical thing to a 10-year-old. And that's when I realized that when you're raising kids, they have a data gathering circuit which functions so well that you can say something important to them and it'll sit in there, and it's like a read-only memory chip. And when they need to recite it, they access it. It comes out their mouth exactly as they heard it. And here's the funny thing. My son is now 31, and for 28 years, every time he has attempted to tell the story or explain the principle, it's come out differently and it's come out in his words. It's been correct, but it's not what I told him to when he was 1.5, and it's not what he said when he was 3. When my kid was 14, he paid for his second chainsaw. When he was 17, he was the youngest deputy captain in the New South Wales Rural Fire Service. I don't believe my son ever date raped anybody. No question of it. Me personally, when I was 18, yeah, it was an iffy thing, like if the lady concerned wanted to press charges and if she took me to court, I could tell my story and I would probably withhold a plea and I'd let the court decide because maybe I did, maybe I didn't. It was a long time ago. I thought differently then to the way I think now, and maybe I was on the wrong side of that one. But the difference kind of between me and Christian Porter is that we both sort of headed off down different paths. I figured that that wasn't something that I ever wanted to do again. And there he is now. I'm 60. He's about 50. He did his bad shit in 1988, if he did. The worst thing I ever really did was 1979. I think my life works pretty well because I woke up to myself. I didn't think that I was entitled to keep on doing stuff that upset other people or caused anybody harm. And the way I look at it, every time I get in a relationship, somebody gets upset. So it's better off if I don't get into a relationship. I like to think that Christian Porter is somebody who made one decision and I'm somebody who made another decision, even though we both grew up in kind of the same system. He was like 9 or 10 years behind me, but because of the social black hole effect, he's on the West Coast and I'm on the East Coast. I don't think there was much difference between the dominant paradigm in the Catholic boarding school I went to and the dominant paradigm in the Catholic boarding school that he went to. I wasn't a successful Liberal Party parliamentarian son, though. If you want to look at how much bullshit he was taught when he was a kid and try and duly compensate for what he thought was okay that was not actually okay, I don't know, maybe he deserved 20 or 30 years to wake up to himself before he changed his ways. And maybe the fact that apparently he never did change his ways, maybe that's why he's been fucking hammered so hard by this alligator, right? Which buried under the surface. Nobody knew about it. All of a sudden, blop, 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 up it comes. Around here, an alligator is what we call something that a previous town council did that they shouldn't have done because there was a corrupt councillor or somebody had an agenda and shit happened that didn't actually meet the guidelines and oopsie daisy, we've got this alligator that's now surfing to fucking harass the current council, and none of the current council had anything to do with it. Well, yeah, Scott Morrison might not have had anything to do with what Christian Porter did in 1988, but Scott Morrison has everything to do with Australia's response to the fact that on the balance of probabilities, if this was a civil case, I can't see Christian Porter managing to argue his way out of it because there are so many people who were there who's at the time when it happened, when it's alleged to have happened, whose stories line up with what Kate has said occurred. It's possible Christian Porter will resign and disappear into obscurity. It's possible he will do a press conference and kill himself in front of the cameras. But the idea that he's going to continue as Australia's Attorney General, yeah, well, Scott Morrison can give that one a go. Peter Dutton, Joshua Freiberg, they can all have a crack at it. I think it's going to sink them. I hope it does sink them. I don't want to live in a country where my government thinks it's okay to fucking rape people as a teenager and then go on to become the lawmaker, the head lawmaker of the nation. I think, like Caesar's wife, Christian Porter, not only has to be beyond reproach, he has to be seen to be beyond reproach. And I don't think he has any fucking credibility at all whatsoever. Does he? See, interrogative, question mark, not a statement. It's possible that Christian Porter and Scotty Morrison and Peter Dutton might decide to come after me as a rabble rouser, as a malcontent, as a protester, as a greenie. But they can't say that they're coming against me from the point of view of the rule of law. Because anytime the law is made by itself to look like an ass. It is time for the legislative branch to do something to call the executive branch and the judicial branch to heel. And the idea that, oh, well, the police of New South Wales can't proceed with an inquiry into whether the Federal Attorney General, New South Wales Liberal Party government, federal government Liberal Party, that's just because the complainant's dead, the complaint's died with him. Like I said, what did ASIO know and when did they know it? And what contact did ASIO have with Kate? This is not going to go away. It's a shittabugger bitch bum cunt fuck poo of an issue. It's a bit like what's going to happen when the United States Federal Attorney General issues the arrest warrants for everybody who incited and participated in the 6th of January insurrection. Shit's going to hit the fan, fucking big time, both in the excited status and here in Australia. Scott Morrison's government is probably, perhaps, maybe, possibly on a very short timeline to self-destruction. What do you think? Interrogative question, not a statement. Warble's not a lot to YouTube. Time will tell. Time will tell. And as Chaucer wrote in the Nun's Priest's Tale 600 years ago, Modre will out. Modre will out. Christian Porter's alive, taking mental health leave, trying to sew together the tattered shreds of his story. Kate is dead. Modre will out! Funk about it. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Ciao.